Hey everybody, welcome back to myjewelryments.com. Today I'm going to do a quick diagnosis and maybe a quick repair to this Rolex watch. It's a men's watch. It has an issue with the date ring. So we're going to tear this down and find out exactly what's going on. It works most of the time, but sometimes it just locks itself in between two positions and you can't move it forward. Let's get started. So here you can see I'm gonna take a look at this date ring issue that we're having with this watch. Now this could be one of several issues. I'm not exactly sure which one it is. It could be the snap ring, which allows the date ring to snap itself back into place. It could be the little spring that advances the date ring over. It could be a number of things. It could be seizing itself up along the frame of the date ring holder or the plate that holds the date ring. Here you can see if I manually adjust it, it does click, but it skipped the 26th and went right to the 27th. And if we go around again, another 24-hour turn here, we should be able to get this to advance to the 28th. Let's just see what happens. And there it goes. Okay, so I can manually do this, and I can manually change the date here. But again, we've got some issues with certain points. It'll just stop, and it seems to work more when manually setting the date than it does when it automatically reaches the midnight position. It doesn't want to actually push itself over. So there's a couple little things I want to take a look at. There is no simple way to diagnose this without actually decasing the watch and taking the hands and dial off and taking a look at the date changing system, the whole articulated system that allows the date ring to click over to the next position. So we have to first decase the watch and take it out of the movement. Now this particular watch has a rather seized up and rusty spring in it, so I can only get one side of the band off without actually doing a little more work to it. The customer hasn't necessarily approved this. This comes from a jeweler that I do some work for, so we're going to take a look and see what's going on inside. Now this watch, we did adjust the time on it before. We did take a quick look at this. It was working for me for a little while, and it looks like it just stopped after a couple of weeks. But it is dirty. It does need a full service. I would recommend that. I don't know if the customer wants to invest the money just yet into the full service and repair of this. So let's get this out of the case. First thing we're going to do is we're going to open up the back and get it out. So as you can see, there's 3 screws that actually hold the automatic winding and rotor system in place. We're going to remove those 3 screws, put them aside, and remove the winding system right from the watch. It comes apart as one piece. You can remove the rotor if you'd like, but you don't necessarily have to do this. The next thing I want to do is turn down the screws, the case screws for the movement, and then we'll just use the clutch release to pop the stem and crown out of the watch. We can turn the movement over so that it comes out of the case, and there we go. Now it's time to remove the hands. I'm going to pop the hands off using hand tools. Now these are hand tool removers, and you can just pop those hands off very carefully not to do any damage to the watch. Once you get the hands off, put them aside. And I always like to put the crown and stem back in a movement that I'm testing, because then I can just see if there's any other issues that I'm working with. So we'll put the crown and stem back in. I'll hit the clutch release button, and that'll allow me to push the stem back into the movement. Give that a quick test, make sure it works, and we're off to the next part, which is to remove the dial. On this particular model, there's 2 screws, one on each side of the movement. We'll loosen those 2 screws, and that'll allow us to take off the dial of the watch. Now here I did find that the hour wheel was pushed up a little bit. I'm not sure why that happened, but we'll push that back into place, and we'll just give it a little test. So let's take a look at this. Here is the advancing spring. This spring allows the date ring to advance when the clock or the watch hits the midnight position, and it just pushes it forward. So that date ring slides, and then this is the snap ring or the snap spring, which allows the date ring to snap into place. So somewhere along the edge here, somewhere along that date ring wheel, we have an issue with this because it's not advancing when it reaches a certain point, and it typically happens between the 25th and the 26th. And you can see as I turn this, we're just going to take a look at that advancing spring. It should click forward and move all the way around. I'm just going to go again here just to double check, and I'm looking for the advancement spring again to advance the date ring, and the snap spring to snap it in place. Should hit the 28th here. There it goes. So let's take a closer look at the automatic date adjustment and how it works. There's a couple little parts here I want you to be aware of and how they work. There is this little piece here that actually is the date ring advance spring, and this is held in by a reverse thread screw that you need a special tool for to remove. You can see it's just a little clip spring that will push the date ring counterclockwise in this case. And as I turn it, you'll see that little clip, that wheel, the advancing wheel, on the lower left side there, it'll turn that clip spring. Now here, this is the snap spring, and this snap spring will actually snap the date ring into position. This is what you get here when it comes back into place. You hear a little snap, and that's the snap spring there. As I advance the hour wheel by turning the crown, you'll see that it wants to just kind of push over. And if you look at those two little springs, we're looking for the advancing spring to move the date ring, and then the snap spring to snap it in place. So the advancing spring will push it forward and allow the snap spring to hit the bottom side of the angle, and then using the teeth on the date ring, it'll just snap into place. So we're going to try to get it to do it here. Should go from the 27th to the 28th, and we get that little snap just like that. So I'm thinking right now that the snap spring and the advancing spring are working pretty good. Now I'm just going to run through using my oiler stick. I'm just going to advance manually the date ring and see if there's any friction or any parts or any locations on any of those 31 teeth that are on that inside location of the date ring, and see if there's any wear, distortion, if there's friction on the bridge that's holding this in place. I'm just looking and trying to feel with my fingers if there's anything that's really bothersome. I apologize for the out of focus here. It's I was trying to get this in focus, but it kept focusing on my thumb, and I didn't have the camera centered correctly on the movement. So forgive me for the focus problems. For all you guys who are going to complain, I'm telling you in advance. So there was a couple little spots that were giving me a little bit of friction when I turned it manually with the oil stick. So what I'm going to do now is remove the date ring from the movement. Now there's this little holder in place that we turn it either clockwise or counterclockwise. We can lift out the date ring from the bridge that holds it in place. And it's a good idea to go through and just check the teeth. And I'm going to do that now and just kind of examine it. I typically will examine this under a microscope just to see if there's any problems with the date disc or the date ring, and see if there's a specific spot. Now I'll always go through first and use a little bit of Rotico and take any debris out, because that'll help when I look under the microscope if there's any actual wear on the date ring. So the Rotico will remove any debris in there. So we're just going to gently kind of wind this on the inside of it, and if there's any fuzz or dust or dirt, we can get it off. Okay, so before I look at that date ring under the microscope, the next thing I want to do is kind of focus in on the snap ring. And you can see on the snap ring here, there's that should be nice and highly polished, and the spring should have good tension, just like it does here. Unfortunately, on the face of the snap spring here, we've got a little debris, and that's actually causing a little bit of a problem. And I feel as though that could be one of the reasons that the date disc is not snapping into location. So we're going to actually take this off and remove it and clean it, and I'll put a little oil on there to get rid of some of this dried up dirt that's on the face of it. And I might actually polish it with a rubber wheel. Sometimes just giving a little bit of a polish can help. And I'm just going to use a little bit of Rotico just to get that loose debris off. I put a little oil on it again, like I said, and that kind of loosens up some of the stuck debris. Again, this part's going to come off, and we're going to put it in an ultrasonic cleaner. Okay, so let's grab the appropriate screwdriver, and we are going to remove this snap spring from the upper plate of the watch. Make sure that you have a nice screwdriver that's fitted to that screw. They should match about the length of it. And once you get that loosened up, it should come right off. There's only one screw holding this in place. Okay, so now that you've got that off, let's take a look at it real closely. If you look, it's not quite highly polished. There is some debris on it. Looks like some dried up oil that somebody might have oiled it a little bit, and it's just got some dirt on it. It's not a part that I typically oil. Although the date ring is metal and there is some metal to metal contact, sometimes it's a good idea to do that. You don't necessarily have to if that snap spring is polished. Okay, so what I've done is I've used a rubber wheel and I've polished up the head of the snap spring a little bit, just ever so slightly. I left it in the ultrasonic cleaner for about 5 minutes, then I used some watch rinse on it just to clean it and dry it. It is now ready to go back into the frame of the watch, so we're going to get that put back in position. It does go in one location, and you'll notice that it is keyed so that there is a groove in the date ring frame or the date ring bridge. And once you slide that in place, the screw hole becomes visible, and then there are two little tabs that hold the snap ring in position. And you can put the screw back in, and with your screwdriver, the matching screwdriver for that, you just tighten it down. Be careful, you don't want to do any damage to these screws, and of course you don't want to scratch anything on it. You're just going to lock that in place, make sure that it's seated correctly, and tighten it. It is a recessed screw, and that makes sure that there's no contact with the date ring teeth. We're going to look at some other issues that I found with the watch. Now we're going to look at the date ring here. We're going to look at the underside of it, and I want to show you what I found on this particular piece here, which led me to look elsewhere in the watch for other issues. If you notice on that one tooth, and I'm going to freeze frame this here so you can see it, there is a little bit of wear that has actually caused an angular groove in the tooth of the date ring. Now that particular groove does not bode well for the winding system or the automatic advancing system, because it won't, if it catches that groove in just the wrong way, it doesn't advance the date ring. So there's a couple things that I can do to fix that, but there's an underlying problem that we have to go look at and see what's actually going on with the watch before we put the date ring back in. Okay, so this watch is a return watch. Now, I kind of know the customer doesn't want to invest the money into a full service, although I think we're getting to the point where we're going to have to. And I'm going to make a little adjustment to the date ring, and I'm going to kind of notch this tooth here. I'm going to bend this tooth around just so that I know it'll catch the snap spring as well as the advancing spring, and it'll allow that to advance forward. Now, we don't want to do it too much. We just want to do it enough so that it catches, but that we don't hold up anything on the movement. Now, this date ring definitely needs to be replaced, and that is it's not necessarily a consumable part, but it is a part that on this particular watch, I think it's due for a change. What else did I find? Well, let's take a look. So I put the date ring back in the watch, and now I'm actually using the manual advance to see if I can get this to move forward. And now I'm finding this other issue, and I'm going to zoom in on it here and pause this and show you. Okay, so if you look at that right arrow, what we're looking at is it's the manual advancement spring. When you put your crown into the first click, that allows you to change the date. Now, in this case, that screw is loose. There's some debris located underneath the screw head, and that spring is just not working well. And if you look, it doesn't always make contact or spring back into position and allow the date to advance correctly 100% of the time. So what I needed to do here was just tighten up that screw. I cleaned it just a little bit to get this watch running. Again, I'm going to make sure I let the jeweler whose customer this is know that this watch does need a full service. We're going to need a new date ring, and it's really getting to the point in time where it's good to put the money into it just to make sure that it works for the next 5 to 8 years. So the next step is to get the dial back on the watch. I'm, of course, leaving the stem and crown in position so that I can go ahead and make sure that I set the watch to the proper time. I'm just going to clean any smudge or anything that's on the dial off before I put it back together. Now we've got the dial in place. It's time to tighten the two dial screws. Again, we're not going to tighten those. You don't want to crank them down to 100 pounds per inch. You just want to make sure they're holding the dial in place. Okay, so we'll just clean off that dial one more time, and we'll get the hands back on. Before you put the hands on, you're going to advance the watch time by pulling it out to the second click and advancing the time until the date ring changes to the next day, and that's the midnight position. First thing we do is we will put the hour hand onto the hour wheel. Once that's set, we can go on to the minute hand. Once the minute hand is set, I'll often put the second hand on, and I will just go let the watch run for a little bit and make sure that we're not getting any interference with hand contact, which could stop the watch. On most of these mechanical watches, it won't damage the watch like it will on a quartz watch. Keep that in mind. If your hands on a quartz watch are rubbing against each other and it forces the watch to stop, most of those gears are plastic inside and they will break. On a Rolex or a good ETA movement, you always have metal gears. There's very few plastic parts in any good quality mechanical watch, so it doesn't have that same issue. It'll just stop running. Well, the movement's ready to go back in the case, so it's time to get it reseated in the case. And let's remove the stem and crown. We'll put hold the watch upside down here while I release the clutch and pull the stem and crown out very carefully. Now, this is also a good opportunity to be careful. You don't want to drop the watch on your watch pad because you don't want to do any damage to the hands. So you're going to do that very carefully, holding that movement upright. And we'll gently place the movement in the case. We will align it so that we can match up the position for the stem and crown on the movement. Now, those two screws, the case screws, only go in one particular way on the case, so you're going to have to twist that movement around until they fall in seat correctly. Once that's done, my process of doing this is I'll insert the stem back into the watch. I'll push the clutch release in and make sure that the stem is working properly inside the watch mechanically. Once I'm happy with that and it works good, I'll test it in the first and second position also. I'll push and tighten in the crown to make sure that it tightens onto the watch case. And then I'll move on to the next part, which is to actually tighten the two case screws down and seat the movement permanently in the watch case. Now, there is a case screw located right next to the balance wheel on this particular model. So be very, very, very careful when you're tightening up that. You're going to tighten that movement in, you turning that watch or that screw counterclockwise. Make sure you do not hit that balance wheel. The next step is to put the winding system back on. Now, I didn't do anything with this in particular because it seems to be winding automatically on its own, although it does need to be serviced. We're just going to seat the winding system back on and put the 3 screws to hold it in place back in. I usually start with 1 screw, and I'll usually have that be one of the middle screws, depending on if there's 3 or 4 screws in there. And I will just make sure that everything works and is seated correctly before I actually tighten that down and make sure that all the gears fall into place. Once that's in place, I'll tighten that last screw down and put the other 2 screws in, tighten those, and we're ready to put the cover back on. Our screws are tightened. We'll put that case back on. We'll get our case tightener tool or our opener tool. We'll tighten that into place. Once that's on there tight, we can move on to the band. The band is always the last thing I do, obviously on the watch, just to make sure it works. And I'm using my plastic pusher here to get that in there so that we don't cause these scratches to the watch case while we push those pins in. Now that that's done, I'm going to go through and do a manual test. I'm going to also let the watch run for 24 hours. I'm going to test it several times to make sure that the date ring is advancing. I don't think it's going to hold up very long. I think this customer's only going to get maybe a month or 2, maybe 3 out of it. Could be a little more, could be a little less. I think the wear on that tooth on the date ring is something that we have to address relatively soon. And the watch, of course, does need a service. It does run rather erratically in the up and down position. So there is a time discrepancy, face up and face down. Guys, I hope you liked this video, and I hope you found it very informative. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing. Hit that subscribe button on the screen below. If you have any requests or comments, please leave them in the comments section below and let me know what you think. Have a wonderful day and take care.